is some of the framework in the top of the car that Martin was just talking about. And they have bolts right here that are going through the metal frame that they would bolt the wood to, that they'd build the structure of the car off of. And that's what's left of that. Like he was talking about, it was turned upside down and basically just sheared apart.
Okay, right here is the remains of an old stairway that goes up into the passenger cars. You see those kind of swooping stairways. To pull it up out of here, you can kind of see how it used to be. It would have sat kind of like that, and it would have been bent out, and then these would be the steps that passengers would take up into the car. But again, the slide hit and just knocked it sideways like that. And again, you see a lot of these around here. There's probably 3 or 4 more around. If you really look, some of them are even flatter than this one, and almost like a pancake. But they have those tattletale steps right here.
And again, this was reserve air tank?
No,
I think it's reserved for steam heat.
Steam heat, yeah. And then you can see where there's also pipe and remains of where a gasket would have been right here. So this is the remains of probably a passenger car, because the mail cars did not have heat. They had their own little heaters in there. So a passenger car would have been here. Again, I believe that remains over there is probably a mail car, so it would have been there. So we were looking at probably the front portion of the passenger train, where this might have been about the first passenger car. The mail car was there. But again, it's very hard to tell. We're guessing, but there's definitely evidence that this is from a passenger coach.
Yeah.
So again, if you see pictures of some of the old cars, maybe the very end of a train, if it doesn't have that fancy rounded one or a fancy porch, they would have something like this that they would put across to, right at the end of a car. And they all had them. They didn't necessarily all use them. If the cars were hooked together, they'd be this way. If it was the very end of the train, it was just a normal passenger coach, not a fancy observation car, then they could put it across this way. So again, evidence that there was a passenger coach here in the area. One of the things you noticed, you'll see some of the old photographs, this rock formation sticks out a little bit, and one of them, it shows actually some, they found some bodies here. You see one picture where they covered a lot of the bodies with the brown check Great Northern blankets. You see that all over. And you see them digging around here, and I believe there's even some, in those old photographs, you'll see this rock. And it's always in relation to the overturned locomotives, and the rock is always in the far background. So the overturned locomotives would have been kind of up in here someplace.
Excuse me, is this the top of the train?
A lot more debris, steps. Here's another set of those steps. You can see how mangled they are from a coach. Kevin, what's your take on this big tank?
Now this looks like air. See the difference? Oh no, excuse me, this might be water.
Hey, wait.
Like water.
Yeah. Part of the old electrical system for the electric locomotives that they operated.
See how it was bolted to the bottom of the frame of the...
Yeah, yeah. So this is probably a water tank from underneath the car. See these big braces on the poles that supported the catenary for the electric railroad that they had running from Wellington to Cascade Tunnel Station through the what's now called the old tunnel. So if you look at old pictures, you'll see those big braces. But yeah, right here is the slack adjuster for the air brakes on a car. And if you look at cars nowadays, this mechanism is virtually the same. It hasn't really changed much in 100 years. But pretty much the slack adjusters on rail cars were pretty much the same, so it's very difficult to say, well, it came off of this car or that car. But you can see it's pretty heavy cast, and this has just got ripped apart like you just took a knife through butter. And again, another pretty heavy piece of iron, and yet look how it's been bent. And this is heavy stuff. Hard to say what this came off of. Right. You find a lot of this kind of debris around. It's just really impossible to say exactly what. I imagine if you had the right blueprint and were a smart guy, you could figure it out, but I have neither. Okay, so now we need to go further this way and get down to the creek. It remains of obviously a mail car. There's a lot of stuff here to look at that tells us, number one, right here, these are the hooks that they would hook the mail bags to as the sorters worked inside to sort. These would be hanging here, the mail bags would be hanging there, and they'd be pulling mail out as the train came by each station, picked up mail, they'd hang it there, and then they'd start sorting. This right here, very heavy, held one of the sorting tables. It would be bolted to the floor, and as you see, it could swivel. Here, it had wing nuts, so they could move them in, or you see some of the old pictures taken inside mail cars, they'd have these tables sorted out. And these would be sitting here with mail bags in them, and then along here would be the wall of the car where they would be sorting through the mail. Further down here, you've got, there used to be, and I don't see it. Is that it? Part of the old...
Yeah, that's it.
It used to be part of the mechanism they used to pick up the mail bags with. And I think this is part of that framework on the outside of the car, and had a kind of a tripod thing in there, and they would extend it out to grab the mail hanging on a rack by the station as the train went by. There used to be some old grab irons and steps. I don't see them anymore here. Again, some more of the framework of the car. So there's a lot of remains of an old mail car right here. One of all the groups of people who suffered the greatest loss, only there was, 13 mail carriers, I believe, mail employee, and only one survived. And that's one of the reasons the carnage amongst the railroaders was so high too, because they were sleeping in the mail car. So you come down clear at the bottom of this canyon, you see the remains of this mail car. Undoubtedly there were a number of the railroad men were in this car too. So there's no way they'd be able to survive that.
So this is an old coal stove?
Yeah, heater stove.
Remember we were talking above, the heaters, each car had a separate, this is one.
Yeah, the mail cars had their own little coal-fired heating stoves. They didn't have the steam heat like the passengers.
All wrapped up in trees that obviously came down at the same time.
Yep. We're sitting down here right by Tie Creek. This is at the very bottom of the cliff where a lot of the stuff finally came to rest. And if you see bits and pieces like this, which we really don't know what it is, it's some kind of mechanical scissor thing, possibly from a mail car. We just don't know. Yeah, right out in the creek there's the frame of a vestibule from the passenger car.
This had to come from a passenger car too.
Well, what I'm wondering,
I think it's the seat bottom.
this bolted to the bottom of the car, and the passenger seat sat on top of this.
Yep.
So this is part of the seat of the passenger train. Intact vent from, and you could probably go to look at old pictures and actually see one.
What is that event from?
Top of one of the cars.
Top of the passenger car. Right over here is another really good example of Mother Nature reclaiming hers. This is not a limb. This is pipe. And you can see not only is the tree growing over it, this tree has completely surrounded it. And if you look out the other side, that piece of pipe goes clear down into the ground there. Again, that's not wood, that's metal pipe over there. And if you look real close here, the pipe continues here and goes all the way up the hill to the other side of that big knot there. So this is basically one big piece of pipe that went the entire length of a car that was not tore apart. It's all pretty much intact. And then again, here's another one of those queen posts. And again, this tree has grown right over the top of it. It's buried underneath the tree.
There's more of it over here, I think.
The other end, right?
Yeah, the whole thing. The tree has grown right over the top of it. What we're looking at here is not a tree. This is a pole that held up the overhead wiring for the electric locomotives that ran between Wellington and Cascade Tunnel Station. You see it's planed, it's got some eye bolts and stuff here that held up the overhead wire. That, or it could also be communication wires as well. But again, this is not just a tree. This was part of the railroad infrastructure that held up the wires at the yard at Wellington. And a lot of this debris here, hard to say whether it's railroad car or again maybe part of this overhead wiring system. I honestly don't know.
I'm inclined to think that it's part of the wiring.
Yeah, and you see another piece right here. Like I say, most of us think this is part of the wiring just because this pole is one of the few remaining poles that you can find. Junction box, we don't know. It could even be off the old electric locomotives. They were damaged but not destroyed. They were heavy enough they didn't slide too far down the hill, but maybe some pieces off of it did. Don't know. But it's some kind of big heavy electrical junction box. Yeah. And then, like I say, you can follow that piece of metal and see the chute clear down to the bottom of the creek and see debris of where a car ended up. But again, you just see how it took this heavy metal and just twisted it like a piece of string or rope or something.
There's a brand new piece of rebar.
You know, when people talk about the Wellington slide, they always wonder why the passenger trains weren't backed from where they were sitting, and we already saw clear down through those trees about a quarter mile away up to where the tunnel is, and it's another quarter of a mile or more that way. So you're talking easily a half mile of distance. But if you stop and think about it, and think of it in terms of a railroader, you've got a passenger train with a very blunt coach in the back. So you're going to ask them to back this train uphill against a lot of piled snow with a blunt end. The locomotives are not going to be on the front. They had no way to get them turned around. They had to push backing up, and it would have to thread its way through all this maze of switch tracks, all the while bucking snow. Chances are it wouldn't even got as far as out of the yard clear down here, and those cars would have derailed and would have been splintered this way and that way all over the place. So the railroaders knew that beyond just the worries about the coal smoke in the tunnel and this and that, it was just physically impossible to safely back that train up and into that tunnel. Even if that had been done, as we already talked about, the tunnel is clear up here, the hotel is clear down there. You now have removed your passengers from the one place where you had any kind of facilities for them to eat. They get up in the tunnel, the snow builds in here, they're trapped up there. So there's a number of just real plausible reasons why they discounted backing the train up into the tunnel. And the other thing that you have to remember, and people I think forget, these men in 1910 did not have the bank of knowledge that we have now. Just a normal person nowadays, we've had how many years of the History Channel and Discovery Channel and National Geographic specials. Our bank, just general bank of knowledge, is far more sophisticated than what they knew back in 1910. It would never occur to them that the whole side of the mountain would break off and slide down. They've seen rolling avalanches going down these chutes. That they understood. A lot of these railroaders came out of the Midwest originally. They understood blizzards and drifting snow. That they understood and knew how to combat. But the fact that, like a knife, you cut this whole hillside off and that it would move in one solid mass down the hill, they had never experienced it. They had never seen it. So in their bank of knowledge, they were railroad men. They knew how to run trains up and down these tracks. They would have had no idea that that could have happened. And so in that case, they all felt that, well, this was a safe place because there are no avalanche chutes here. It's just a hillside. 20/20 hindsight tells us, well, that was a bad mistake. But again, you have to put yourself into their mind frame. And so I don't ever really blame them too hard for what happened. Impossible to get the trains to the tunnel. Their bank of knowledge was such that they probably would have had no way of knowing that this hillside was going to come down on the trains. And the Supreme Court in Washington ended up siding with that very idea.